Hello, and welcome to the Catholic Art Institute podcast. I'm Kathleen Carr. I'm the president and founder of the Catholic Art Institute. And today I'm joined by Karl Fougerousse, who is assistant professor of fine art for Franciscan University, Steubenville in Gamming, Austria. Thanks for joining me today, Karl.
Yeah, thanks, Kathleen. I appreciate you having me on.
No worries. Karl is joining us today because we wanted to have a conversation about the MFA program that they're looking to establish at Franciscan University's Gamming campus, but also just to talk about the state of sacred art these days and atelier training, skill building, and how the university can really gain from considering this program, and that there's really a need for it, and how we can serve the arts. So, Karl, if maybe you can start by giving us a little background of your training and university education, and then we can segue into
Absolutely. I'd be happy to. Yeah, so I've been actually back here in Gaming for about 3 years now, and teaching sacred art, painting, and art history. And prior to that, I'd been in Savannah, Georgia, where I ran my studios, Red Fern Fine Art Studio, taking on commissions for churches all over the states in sculpture and painting and stained glass primarily. I also taught a little bit at SCAD during my time in Savannah. And in terms of my educational background, I got my master's degree from the New York Academy of Art with a concentration in figurative painting. And I studied philosophy actually at Franciscan University back in the 90s. So I got my BA in philosophy in 98.
Wonderful. That's an interesting combination. We've spoken before about the need for the philosophical underpinnings of beauty in our culture. So that's it's nice that you had that. And then the New York Academy is a very storied and well-regarded school. So we're here today because we want to talk more about how we can support this. And then Franciscan University is really trying to do some research into founding an MFA program. So maybe we can just have a little overview of that, Karl, right now.
Sure. Yeah, so the university has asked me to basically provide a survey that substantiates our hunch that there's a demand out there for a program like this. On the one hand, you can kind of look out across the cultural landscape and see that within secular communities, there's been an incredible resurgence of interest in atelier-based training and sort of figurative art in the tradition that is rooted in sort of skill building and technique, essentially. And that's been going on for the last 40 years, really yielding an enormous number of ateliers and academies and schools that promote that. And some of them are degree granting, and some of them are certificate granting, or some are just continuing education and whatnot. So the question is, of course, whether there are people who are interested in making Catholic art, sacred art for churches, and undergoing this training, but not just sort of leaving it at the technical level, but rather bringing in ways in which to craft sacred narratives, so to speak, and use composition as a way of conveying deeper faith-based meanings that, of course, our tradition has richly displayed over the centuries in many different ways in beautiful works of art for churches. So my claim is that there is such a group of people out there. I encounter young artists all the time who ask me where they can train and learn these things and so on. And the unfortunate reality is that there's not a lot of programs that combine both of those elements, the conceptual element that is theological and philosophical, along with the technical element, which is essentially in alignment with the great tradition of Catholic art over the last several centuries. So we're trying to fill out a survey with 500 applicants that would substantiate this demand. And then if that all goes well and we can sort of build an interest in this, we would launch a program possibly within the next couple of years here in Gaming on the Austrian program, and have sort of a study abroad program for the master's degree here.
Wonderful. I understand why there's a great need for this. And to your point, I mean, I think we should probably do two things. Number one, let's talk a little bit about what atelier training is, because I have been trained in the classical methods, and so have you. And the New York Academy is very good with that. And from being a representational painter, I have seen how these programs have really exploded. So I think, it's good that the university has this vision to want to support this, because they're wonderful programs that have gone from a handful to almost 100 in the past 20 years. This is what I've seen. So there's a real growing hunger and need to build your skills, but there's no Catholic institution that's traditionally Catholic or passionately Catholic like Franciscan that's really supporting this. And so I think this is really a visionary thing, especially if they're able to establish it. So just let's define a little bit about the atelier training itself, if you could.
Yeah, sure. So my training at the academy took on a handful of different strands, kind of, that you could say were interwoven with one another. On the one hand, we did almost exclusively work from life. So we had models come in and we painted portraits and drew portraits and worked from the model in both sculpture and painting. Even if you were just a painting major, you still work through kind of the artistic anatomy components and sculpture and so on. So there's the marriage of observation and sort of building upon a conceptual model that you're kind of trying to form in your mind so that your observational skills get more refined as you go. And this has one foot in the door of artistic anatomy, of course, and then one foot in the door of sort of just understanding the structure, the topography of the body as it relates to the anatomical structures beneath. Of course, we're looking a lot at art history in the process as well, because the old masters have solved these problems in the utmost perfect ways as one can imagine in both sculpture and painting. And all this, of course, has a foundation in drawing. So we were constantly drawing as well. And along with that, there's all kinds of different other considerations that were addressed in full classes on perspective, for example, linear perspective, which also has an impact on the way in which one conceives of the human form in space. But then also a great deal of time was spent on composition. So the idea that the way in which the painting or sculpture is orchestrated, or even the pose that the figure takes on, or the expressions and hand gestures, the things that are populating these works of art, can all be carriers of meaning that can help kind of continue to tell the story of, and what my main interest was even back in school, these sacred narratives. Of course, everybody there was doing all kinds of different things, and it took on many different forms. And one of the things that I saw while I was there is that this sort of lack of cohesiveness amongst the student body, perhaps in the faculty, that there wasn't kind of a genuine or profound dialogue that could happen among students, because it was sort of like all these different insular approaches to art making, where everybody was sort of encouraged to just kind of do their own thing, find their own voice, come up with their own idiosyncratic kind of way of doing things. And here I would hope in a program that's sort of technically modeled off of that, that it would also bring to the table something of a school, so to speak, in which everyone's sort of speaking the same language and striving towards a similar goal, even if done in slightly different ways, that there can be, I think, a greater deepening of one's kind of understanding of a particular subject matter in art by having a sort of a group effort towards delving deeper and deeper into a subject, instead of sort of this almost being kind of moved back and forth amongst too many different possible options as a young artist. So I think that was an important realization that I had, that giving a greater focus to a program like this could help young artists actually not only deepen their understanding of how to make pictures, but also of the technical elements that went into making a great work of art.
Yeah. And I think to further that is just also the fact that the atelier method is really it's a structured way to take your natural abilities and really set them free. So it's really learning to skill build, as you're drawing, measuring your drawing, study of anatomy. These are the things that came down from really the guilds, in the medieval times, the artwork commissioned by the Catholic Church, and then filtered down through the centuries to really train artists. And what happened in the 20th century is the conceptual art came in, the idea of simply expressing yourself. You don't want this training because it somehow robs you of some sort of childlike creativity. This was sort of part of the thinking. And what ended up happening is that this skill building aspect of being trained as an artist generally has disappeared from many or most secular art programs. So you have these decorated art colleges. I went to a very esteemed art college for my undergraduate, and generally you just weren't trained. And there's sort of a fallacy, I think, that happens is that, you have natural ability and you just fall out of the sky like Michelangelo, and that there aren't ways to go and foster it and train, and there really are. And so I ended up finding the classical method after I had received my BFA, and then you start to see the differences. So in secular art college, I was told to go to the art store and buy my paints, and nobody was really telling me how to arrange my palette and mix to match the flesh, and really observational study, and how you break down a drawing, a figure. How do you get all of that measured and correct? And I had a lot of natural ability, but you will make a lot of mistakes as a young artist, which when you train with a master, and that's really part of this style of training, is that you have a master artist at the center of it, demonstrating to you and also going around to help you. And you start to
Yeah.
work through how to describe your form better and get your halftones right, and how you make a picture from drawing into finished painting. And this was never taught to me in art college, but is what I learned afterwards. And it was such a revelation to me, and it was so, my work took off. I could really get to what was in my imagination better in terms of making it in front of me. And so I wanted to share that and the methods and with this organization, because it's not something that as a young artist. You think, I'm going to go to art college, I'll take drawing classes, they'll teach me to draw like Michelangelo. Well, that's not what happens in art college. Oftentimes what happens is they'll take a few things. You could get somebody that's older and better trained. I had a couple instances where I got some, slightly better professors, but for the most part, they were mainly modernists, and that's really what you're encouraged. And the rest of the student body too, I found, was very much along those lines of, when can we get you on the off ramp to novelty, really. It's this originality, this self-expression. So,
Yeah.
and that, so that's that. So I'm a big proponent of getting the skills up. Skill building is so important, and that's what the atelier method is. And then on top of that, you really have to learn what is appropriate when it comes to sacred subject matter, and that's a whole other thing. So I love that there's this interest on the part of Franciscan University to support this, because presently there's really few places that are and would. And so
Yeah.
I think this is important, that, we're having this discussion, and that, that people can take this survey. Is there an interest in this? And if there is, then to please fill out this survey and show that, you would support such a thing. So obviously this is, there is a need for this, because I'm not seeing it in other Catholic programming. And, and Franciscan is such a reputation for being so passionately Catholic and Orthodox that way. So I love
Absolutely.
that there's an interest here. So tell me a little bit more, about what led you to the Sacred Art School and the Franciscan Study Abroad program in Gamming. A little of your
Yeah,
history
so
too.
kind of long story short, I actually have a longer history with this place. Even before I was a student at Franciscan University for my undergraduate studies, my father started this program back in 1991. So I was a teenager when we moved here to Gaming, and I just went to the local schools here in Austria and learned German and so on. But my father had spent his whole career, even all the way through the early 2000s, kind of setting up study abroad programs for universities, for American universities to send their students over to Europe for a semester. So he had done this for the University of Dallas in Rome in the 70s and 80s, which is where I grew up as a kid, and spent from age 5 to 13 or 14 or so in Rome. And then we moved to Austria, like I said, here to Gaming when I was about 16 when he started this program. So for me, coming back here is kind of an interesting twist of fate. It's like coming home. It's also an honor to be teaching at not only my alma mater, but also at a program that he started. And of course, to be kind of on the doorstep of possibly starting my own program here in fine art is sort of just like the cherry on top, so to speak, the icing on the cake, because he did so much to inspire so many people that came through these programs, and that really had an impact on the way that I see teaching and art making as being kind of something whereby you can kind of impart to others this enthusiasm that you have, this sort of being filled with the spirit of the thing that animates you and motivates you to getting other people excited about it. And he definitely did that, like I said, for thousands of students who came through these programs, who visited Europe and had a life-altering experience here, not in small part because of the art and architecture that they saw here as being kind of vessels through which these deep meanings that they were longing for, that we all yearn for, to be expressed in such a beautiful manner that's so inviting and draws us in and is fulfilling and uplifting. So that all really affected sort of my decision to, of course, come back here when the position opened up and I was accepted. And so we moved here, like I said, a couple of years ago with my wife and 4 sons. And we've been teaching some of the undergraduate students here. And that led to kind of the idea of possibly building upon that and creating a degree program, because I saw that there was actually a lot of talent at Franciscan University, even though we don't have an undergraduate program. So that, coupled with the idea that over the years in my studio practice, even I'd been contacted by a lot of students that were looking for places to find this type of education, led to some conversations here that were met by the administration in Gaming here enthusiastically, and then we brought that to main campus and sort of have been building on that trajectory since. So my proposal that I'm putting together right now, which is kind of one of these elaborate documents in which I'm articulating the whole curriculum, also sort of trying to state the why and the wherefore, and corroborate some of these things with data from market analysis and these surveys and so on and so forth, all to be submitted to the university for their appraisals through committees, et cetera, will all take place over the next semester or so. And we'll see if there's kind of at that point a full commitment on this part of the university to actually embark on trying to get it accredited and all that stuff. So it's a bit of a process. We're in the kind of early parts of that process. And I, again, have my work cut out for me, just sort of presenting all the relevant information to those who are theoretically kind of eager to see something like this take off, but just need to have that sort of substantiated for them. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And I'm happy to be in support of this. This is why we're having this conversation, because as I said, I've seen the atelier programs worldwide really explode, and I get a lot of interest from young artists, either in high school or college, or looking to go into, a program and that's Catholic, and it's hard for me to find a place to direct them. So I really hope that the university does move forward with this. And I think there's really something also about this campus that you're on. We can just see simply in this little video how unbelievably beautiful it is. There's some pictures on our website. I can post some more pictures. But tell us a little bit about, the digs there in Gamming. And I'm
Sure.
also in full support of just the access that you have being based in Europe for a semester or even longer to all of these museums and things to get to see. So tell us a little more about that. It's
Yeah, so the site here is a Carthusian monastery. It's actually Europe's largest Carthusian monastery. It was built in the 1330s and was active as a monastery all the way through the late 1700s, and then was vacant for a couple hundred years. So it's an incredible Gothic structure in the church and the exterior of all the buildings. Many of these were then renovated kind of in a Baroque style later. So this room that we're in right here is just a sort of a little side studio in my office, in which we have smaller sort of cast drawing classes and things like this. But just on the other side of a door in front of me is the large Baroque bibliothèque, which is a gorgeous room that can easily fit, 30 or so art students at easels and so on, with a beautifully painted figurative program on the ceiling with a dome that has figurative scenes representing the liberal arts, and on either end you have figurative scenes commemorating all kinds of different events, including the four gospel writers at one end, and the four major doctors of the church at the other. You have all kinds of allegorical figures throughout. It's just a beautiful, ornate Baroque building that we use as our main classroom for a lot of the studio art classes. And of course, we have our own church here in which we celebrate Mass daily. All the students live in the monastery here. We have about 200 or so undergraduate students that come every semester. And it's just a lovely setting, both in terms of the architectural setting, but also the natural setting. So we're about 80 or so miles from Vienna, and Gaming is a small town kind of in the foothills of the Alps. So it's a really beautiful natural setting as well. But like you're saying, sort of the access to all of Europe really at our doorstep, Vienna being so close with the Kunsthistorisches Museum, which is a world-renowned art museum that has incredible works of art from both the southern regions in Europe, a whole wing of Italian and Spanish paintings from the Renaissance and Baroque, and a whole northern wing that celebrates Flanders and Germany and Austria, and these regions up here, with tons of Rubens paintings, for example, and a whole room of Bruegel paintings, et cetera. So it's really an astonishing place. I take my students there every semester to draw from the works of art in the museum. We also have a connection that we've set up with the Vienna Academy of Art, which is much like what you were describing earlier in terms of these extremely sort of modernist and completely detached from the tradition academies. However, they do have an incredible collection of thousands of casts of the likes you'd see in any museums around Europe. They have, the whole to scale replicas of Michelangelo's Moses and the Pietà, and works from the altar of Zeus from antiquity and Pergamon and so on. And so we get to go and draw there as well every semester.
And drawing for
Um,
tests is also another more traditional means of learning. You're studying something that's a masterpiece, but then when it's you're doing a drawing of something that's a white cast, it helps you become really sensitive to getting your halftones right. It's a wonderful practice, which, there are great casts that we had at Maryland Institute College of Art where I went for my undergrad, but we were never taught to draw from them. So I love that that's something that the students have access to. It's really great.
Yeah, it's an amazing opportunity. They don't use them, like you're saying. The Vienna Academy does not use them. The students wouldn't know what to do with them. And when I first started kind of reaching out to them, they thought the person that was the curator of this portion of their collection thought it was quaint and funny that we were coming over to draw. But they've since grown to enjoy the fact that the work gets some use. To your point earlier about something being kind of appropriate for sacred image making. There's a kind of a stylization or an abstraction of a sort that is required in order to kind of remove it from the all too natural and make it somehow slightly unfamiliar and elevated and supernatural. And of course, the Greeks did this for their own reasons. They were thinking more of ideal form and the fact that everything in the physical world and nature was some kind of a slightly impoverished version or corrupt version of the ideal form of what it would look like for a perfect human being to exist. But in their sculptures, they were striving, of course, to do this. So there's a certain way in which those forms are universalized in a very beautiful and elevated manner. So part of the reason for studying from these is not just to be able to analyze the form as you're describing, but also to analyze the way in which a stylization can lend a sort of otherworldliness to and beauty, kind of ideal beauty to the subject matter. So, of course, artists in the Catholic tradition took that principle and used it as a way of depicting our supernatural beliefs, which were different, not exactly about Platonic ideal forms, but rather simply about a fallen world in which we live, one which will, in the beatific vision, be restored, in which this reunification and sort of recreation through Christ of the new heaven and the new earth, when all is restored, that world would look slightly different, and persons sort of in their glorified bodies after the resurrection would look slightly different, and having a concept of how that can be idealized in a way so as to portray that is an important thing we can start learning from the Greeks, and then of course carry on through the tradition down through the centuries of Catholic artists who sought to do similar things.
Yes, exactly. James McCreary spoke so beautifully about this at the recent conference. We will hopefully share his video later this week, and it speaks to this because theologically, you're pointing out something that's really important, and that we don't want to pedestrianize the sacred. And so, when we are partaking in the divine life, as we would if we're depicting the saints, we lose the specific things about us, our race, our whatever, and we're pure spirit, before the throne of God. And you'll see sort of this sense of being disinterested in a certain way. They're focused on the beatific vision, and so they're not looking at us. This idealization that you'll see, and maybe a Bellini or a Botticelli or the Northern Renaissance artists. Oftentimes they're not engaging with us either. They're more focused on God. So it's nice that you're able to impart that and to teach the students that, because it's not always obvious, but it really does make a difference in getting it right at the end of the day when you're depicting the sacred. So it's another dimension here that I think will be some really important add to the fact that you're not only teaching these methods to help the students grow in their skill level, but also to understand the theological underpinnings of creating sacred art. It's very important. It's great that you're dedicating yourself to this. And no better setting than Europe, because the access by train. I think if you've never lived over there, you don't realize how accessible it is. You can really get from Austria down to Italy quite readily, and then you have the access to all of that. I took a semester in Florence when I was in art college, and that was the best thing I ever did. Completely life-changing, and traveled all around and got to see so many things, and then take the train up into Germany and through Austria, and Austria is just absolutely breathtaking. My goodness. So it's really a rich thing that you're able to offer the students there with that program. I think it's wonderful. So how does your studio practice inform your teaching, and maybe a little more about the curriculum that you teach there also?
Yeah, so one of the things that I spent a lot of time doing, working on commissions at the studio, was working with committees and seeing kind of the professional side of running an art studio. So that's something that we would like to build into the curriculum here as well. It's something that all too many art programs don't um, uh, offer their students, sort of the practical. That they might teach the techniques, or they might not. They might only teach the conceptual elements. But one of the things that most of them are missing is kind of that hands-on logistics and sort of economics of running a studio. So one of the things that we hope to add to this curriculum is also that dimension. Of course, in trying to sort of navigate some of that, it has taught me certainly ways in which to, I guess, speak diplomatically about people's opinions in art and people's what they would like to see in their commissioned artwork, et cetera, where you're not always in agreement. So I think teaching in such a way that you're constantly trying to uplift the student and be respectful of their opinions and sort of what they bring to the table, so as to not really kind of crush their spirits, is an important element of this. I've heard too many stories of people that were ultimately dissuaded by uh, instructors who were too harsh, or people who didn't believe that they were capable of sort of rising above whatever the difficulties are that art making presents them, and so on. So I'd say that's one of them. But also you see a lot in art education, this process-based approach to art making, where you can sort of forever sort of swim around in this middle ground of process where you're removing and then adding and never quite committing to a finished work of art, which in a professional setting you can't do. At some point you have to sort of finish the work. It's a finished piece and you deliver it and it's installed and so on. So teaching students how to actually finish works of art is something that was, as I remember sort of being an art student, much discussed amongst us as students. Like, how do you know when it's done? Or you could work on this infinitely. But there are actually steps that you can take to arrive at something that you're saying is a completed work of art. And that's something I didn't learn until after school. And so I strive to teach that to my students now as well.
Yeah, well, it's great. I what I noticed when I went and started the classical training was that, to your point, if you don't want to crush the spirit, is that there really was more of a welcoming, fostering environment, to the young students versus there was a bit of a cutthroatness that could happen in secular art college. I'm more original than you. There could be a tendency for this, and God forbid you wanted to make something that was representational and beautiful. Oftentimes you were maligned for doing that in a
Yeah,
secular setting, that's already been done. It's very sugary, it gets, it's so that's it was discouraged, and then you're not getting the skills on top of it, and the people teaching you oftentimes don't have them themselves to even give to you, so
sure.
it's good to have that. But also the other thing was, when I was in secular art college, I would be tasked with some wall-sized drawing, which I was asked to produce in a week. And you just end up frustrated because that's just unrealistic. And what I came to
Right.
discover was through the traditional methods is you have to slow down. You have to be patient with yourself. You start to grow in courage too, but it takes time to sit and
Yeah,
to observe and to finish a painting and to work in an older style, and the world has moved on in the secular space, and so it can set up this sense of frustration for an artist because they don't understand, well, how come I can't get from A to B? And so it's good that you're able to have not only that experience but to help these students get to that point. I do
sure.
think
And
it's important.
that's, as I was saying earlier, something that they need to be able to then communicate to their clients later as well. When everyone on a committee or a commissioning body, whether it's a church or an individual client that wants the work yesterday, to be able to say, hey, these things are tried and true methods, but they also require an enormous amount of time. Some of these works of art that the great masters made, they spend a decade kind of fiddling with forever. I'm not going to hold you hostage in your project hostage for 10 years, but understand that to get it at the highest level that I'm capable of, it's going to take some time. And
Right.
like you said, that's not something that's innate to our cultural understanding where everything kind of can be mass produced or is on the shelves already and you just kind of go through and get it. When you're dealing with custom made works that are of a higher order like this, the time factor is probably the most important one in terms of getting it right.
I know. It's true. Well, people watch Bob Ross and he's knocking out something that sort of looks realistic in 30 minutes, but it's not really high quality.
Right.
It's there is a time investment that no one is. I mean, I know for myself that I'm really motivated to try to get things finished, but it just is going to take a couple weeks, and especially if you're working in oil paints, they have to let them dry a little bit. It's a whole process. So managing your client too is a really important thing. I'm glad that you're able to help the students with that because I think people they they take in the arts in their leisure time, so they think it's a leisure hobby for us, and it's sort of just this fun thing that we do on the weekend or something. I don't think that people. I don't blame them, but I don't think that they can always appreciate. It's draining. It's rewarding on one hand, but it can be very tiring. The focus and the amount of hours to complete something. So that's really that's a nice thing that you're bringing to this, and it certainly wasn't something I saw in my art training and my undergrad. Um, so do you have any advice for young artists trying to figure out how to make a go of it, and as artists these days, and especially in the sacred space?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think on the one hand, probably certain cliches come to mind, like, trust the process or something like this. I mean, in a sense, like if you feel the vocation that you're being called to do this, then as you go out on a limb, you sort of need to just sort of trust that you'll be able to make a go of it. That's one aspect. The other one would be to seek out mentors. So if you can't find a program that you like, and hopefully, like I said, we'll be able to get this one up and running before too long. And then my advice would be look us up and check out what we're doing and see if it's right for you. But until then, getting as much technical training as you can and then finding people who are willing to sort of like give you advice on how to remain actively involved in art making, which is hard to do if you're working full time or something like this. So seeking out artists that are encouraging to be around is an important aspect of it, and finding ways as best you can to devote a majority of your time. So this ties into what you were talking about a moment ago, that not only does it take a long time to make a work of art, it takes even longer to learn how to make a work of art. And so if you were to, only devote a certain amount of time a week, 8 hours a week or 10 hours a week to your craft, ultimately what you could be learning in a 40-hour work week or a 50-hour work week, if it were your profession, would so rapidly outgrow what you're able to do as a hobbyist. Just expanding that over years, what you can learn in 1 year would take you 5 years. What you could learn in a decade would take you 50 years. And you don't have 50 years in that sense. I mean, if you want to work as a professional artist at the highest level, you want to spend a decade full time learning and investing everything in that so that you can then have a 30 or 40-year career making art at the highest level. So keeping that in the forefront of your mind, even as everyone's telling you to just like get a job and do this on the side.
Well, that's all very helpful, especially the fact that you have been a working artist and are able to guide the students. So you have an awful lot to offer over there, all around, in the curriculum, your experience, and your skill level, and that beautiful campus. I can put some photographs up so that people can really see just how glorious it is. So is there anything else that you would like to share or touch upon? Um,
that we haven't talked about today yet? Well, yeah, I guess I would sort of want to stress maybe one more time, in a sense, to potential art students that are watching this, that are interested in the prospect, that on the one hand, their assistance in kind of spreading the word amongst their peers will go a long way in actually making this happen. So if there's anybody out there who listened to this and sort of said, well, that sounds like the exact kind of program that I would want to be a part of, at this point, the best thing they can do to help is get their friends to also fill out the survey. And it really goes through question by question, telling them kind of a little bit more about the curriculum also. So there's a way for them to gain more information and see pictures of the campus here and whatnot by filling out the survey and kind of looking through that. I also wanted to point out, sort of, if anybody's interested in seeing my work, to see, what the types of things or approaches I take to painting and sculpture that would be part of the instruction on Franciscan University's website in the Gaming program, where we have the link to the survey. There's also a link to my website. And my wife, Marissa Lilji, teaches here as well, mostly a lot of portraiture classes and drawing classes. So there's also some information about her work and a link to her website as well, that you can sort of view the type of work that we're doing and under whom you'd be sort of instructed during this time here.
Wonderful. And I can put those links in the show notes as well, so people can access all of that information, see all the beautiful work, and hopefully especially support this survey, which we really hope will encourage the university to move ahead with this program. I think it's time. It's very needed. And I also see a big growth in a lot of the liturgical art space where artists could get work. A lot of them
Absolutely.
are. I know Evergreen has many offices all over the country. Conrad Schmidt, Canning Liturgical. There's a great interest in de-recavation projects.
Yeah.
There's a lot new church construction, especially as the faith is growing in areas like the South. There's been a lot of migration over the past several years, and so there's new church construction and then a lot of renovation work. And a lot of those companies are pulling from the atelier programs because this is where the students have the training. So if there can be a merging of this with the sacred art at Franciscan, and I just love that the students can attend daily mass and access to everything else. It's a wonderful, wonderful idea. So I'm fully in support, and hopefully we'll have some good news soon. So please,
Absolutely.
if you're watching this, fill out the survey. It's very short. It won't take you but 2 minutes, and share it with your friends. And hopefully, we can say some prayers that this will become a reality too. So
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on again, Kathleen, and thank you for your time.
oh, you're welcome. It was a great conversation. I think it's needed too. I think it'll really help people to understand, if you have a call to this. I mean, this is a vocation, that there are certain things that you'll have to navigate, within the culture and within the training. But it's really possible to go from having a lot of natural ability to really being able to produce beautiful work, in the tradition. But we're not simply copying that tradition, because it's another thing that I think sometimes comes up, that we're just simply copying the past, and we're not. And one of the things that I love Duncan Stroik, who, traditional architecture, said was that we're trying to make grandchildren. So your grandchildren may look like you, but they're not the same. It's all the tradition is simply helping us, learn certain methods and things that are ordered, and then it's always going to have a personal touch to it, through the hand of an individual artist. We all have our ways that God is inspiring us, and our hand and our vision and our way of painting, expressing ourselves. So this is wonderful. Thank you very much for being on today.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you.